They sent me to him like I was nothing. 3 days later, he sent their alpha a message. It had no words, just ash. I was standing on the battlements when the rider came back from the border with the answer, and I watched a hardened warrior unwrap an oilcloth in front of his king and tip a careful grey handful onto the stones. The burned remains of the banner my old pack had flown for 200 years. The wolf and thorn I had been raised under, reduced to something the wind kept trying to take. The whole courtyard went silent. Somewhere below me, a man said the word war as though tasting it. And I, who had been delivered to this fortress 4 days earlier as a deliberate insult, a rankless woman handed over to be used up and forgotten, stood there with the wind pulling at my hair and understood that the most powerful wolf in the north had just burned my entire history to the ground, and that I did not yet know whether that made me safe or the most hunted woman alive. It had started 4 days before, with a rope on my wrists and a man I had been raised to fear. I should tell you how I came to be a gift, because the why of it is the whole story. And my old pack got the why entirely wrong, which is the only reason any of us are alive to argue about it. I was 23 and I had no rank, which in a wolf pack is a particular kind of nothing. My mother had been a healer and a foreigner. My father was a question no one answered, and Alpha Roth, who ruled my birth pack the way frost rules a field, had decided when I was a girl that I was useful chiefly as a thing to threaten people with. I had spent my life one wrong word away from being given away, and the spring I turned 23, I finally said the wrong word. I said it in open council. Roth had taken a border village's whole winter store as tribute, and a child had died of the hunger that followed. And I stood up in the hall, where rankless women were meant to pour and not speak, and I named the dead child out loud. That was all. I gave the council her name, because Roth had not. And a thing that has a name is harder to forget. He decided that night to be rid of me. But Roth never simply did a thing when he could do it as a message. So he did not exile me, and he did not kill me. He sent me north in a cart with my wrists bound to the Alpha King of the Iron Territories, the most feared wolf in the north, a man whose name mothers used to make children behave, as a gift. A rankless, motherless, disposable woman, handed over with a sealed letter that I was not meant to read, and read anyway, because no one thought to guard a thing they had already thrown away. The letter offered me to the king, for his use and amusement, a token of the regard of the wolf and thorn. It was an insult dressed as tribute. Send your enemy your garbage and call it a gift, and watch him choose between being humiliated by accepting it and being shamed by refusing it. Roth thought he had built a trap with no way out of it. He thought I was the bait that cost him nothing. I rode north for 2 days in that cart, composing the things I would say to the monster at the end of the road. And not one of them survived the moment I actually crossed his threshold. The great hall of the Iron Territories was built to make you feel the weight of who lived there. All dark stone and iron, and a ceiling lost in smoke. And at the head of it, a throne carved like a wolf rising from the rock. And on the throne, the king himself, Eric. He was younger than the stories build, and harder than they manage. A tall man gone very still, with pale eyes that had clearly been bored a moment before the doors opened, and were not bored now. They walked me up the centre of the hall, with my wrists still bound, the herald reading Roth's insult aloud in a voice that got smaller as he understood what he was reading. And I kept my chin level, because it was the only thing of mine that no one had taken. I had decided I would not be afraid where anyone could see it. That decision lasted until I was perhaps 10 paces from the throne. Because 10 paces from the throne, the king stood up.
He stood up the way a thing comes off the ground when it has decided to hunt, all at once, without a wasted motion. And the entire hall flinched, and his wolf came up into his eyes so fast and so completely that the pale went gold. And for one long, terrible, silent moment, the most feared wolf in the north stared at a bound and rankless woman across his own hall, as though every other person in it had ceased to exist. I have since heard 100 versions of that moment. In all of them, I am beautiful or magical, or marked by fate in some visible way. I was none of those things. I was tired and travel-filthy and furious. What I was his. His wolf knew it before either of us did. The way the prompt of the bond always runs ahead of the man. And I watched the king of the Iron Territories take exactly one look at the insult my pack had sent him, and decide something that no letter could undo. "Cut her loose," he said. His voice was very quiet. The quiet of his went through that hall like a blade through cloth. A warrior cut the rope from my wrists. I rubbed the feeling back into my hands and met the king's gold eyes, because I had decided long ago that I would meet the eyes of any man who thought he owned me. And I said the first true thing that came to me, which was not any of the speeches I had practiced. "There has been a misunderstanding," I said. "I am not a gift. I am an insult. You are meant to be humiliated by me. I would not want you to waste a good evening being charmed." For 4 seconds, the king of the Iron Territories looked like a man who had been struck by something he could not see. And then, against what was plainly his every intention, the corner of his hard mouth moved. "Osric," he said, to the scarred second who had appeared at his shoulder, his gold eyes never leaving me. "Find out what their alpha values most, and then find out how fast we can burn it." That was the first time I learned the particular way Eric fought his own wolf, which was badly and out loud, and with a kind of grim astonishment at himself, as though some other man kept seizing the reins of his life and making decisions he then had to live with. He had taken one look at me, and his wolf had chosen, and the man it belonged to spent the next 4 days regretting it for 4 seconds at a time, and then doing exactly what it wanted anyway. The ash went south the next morning. The war came north 3 days after that. If you have ever been handed to someone as a thing to be used up, if you want to know what happens when the most dangerous wolf in the north decides you are not garbage, but a reason, and whether being someone's reason is the same as being seen. Stay with me. Follow her. Do not lose the thread. Because the war everyone thought was about me turned out to be about something else entirely, and I was the last to learn it. They housed me in those first days, not as a servant and not as a prisoner, in a tower room with a fire and a door I was free to open, which unsettled me more than chains would have. I kept waiting for the cost of it. I had been raised to understand that nothing came to me for nothing. The king came to find me on the second evening. He did not send for me. He came himself, climbed the tower stair himself, and stood 3 paces inside my open door with the particular stillness I was learning to read as a man holding himself on a leash. "You should not have to come up here," I said. "Kings send for people." "I find I do not want the court to watch me send for you," he said, with the same grim honesty I would come to know as the truest thing about him. "They are already saying enough." He looked at the fire rather than at me, which I would learn was what he did when his wolf was loud. You named a dead child in your Alpha's hall, and he sent you to me to be destroyed for it. You read the letter. I read the woman. His jaw moved. Why did you say her name?
You knew what it would cost you. I thought about lying. I was good at lying. It had kept me alive. But there is a particular exhaustion that comes of being seen, and I was too tired that night to perform. Because no one else was going to, I said. Because a thing with a name is harder to throw away. I should know.
Something happened in his face then. A crack, fast and quickly covered. In a man who I do not think had let anyone watch his face in years. He left soon after, without saying what he had come to say. And I lay awake a long time trying to understand why the most feared wolf in the north had climbed a tower to ask me a question, and then fled from the answer. I told myself it was the bond. I told myself it was simple, that his wolf had marked me, that he wanted me, that the war was the oldest story there is, a powerful man burning the world down over a woman. It is a flattering story. It is also, I would learn, almost entirely wrong. And the wrongness of it nearly cost both of us everything. The midpoint of any story is the place where what you thought it was turns out to be something else. Mine arrived in the form of a locked room and a chair no one sat in. I had been given the run of the fortress by then, the king's doing over the loud objection of half his court, and I had gone looking for the library the way I always went looking for the quiet. And I had taken a wrong turning and found instead a small room off the king's own wing. The door was not locked. Inside there was nothing but a single chair, a cold hearth that had not been lit in a long time, and on the mantel above it, a sealed jar of grey ash, and a girl's wooden practice sword, sized for a child, worn smooth at the grip. Osric found me there. He did not order me out. He looked at the jar for a long moment, and then he told me. Because someone had to. And because, I think now, he had decided I needed to know what I had walked into before it walked over me. The king had had a sister. Younger, fierce, beloved. The only family the old war had left him. And 11 years before, when Eirik was newly crowned and not yet feared, a neighbouring Alpha had asked for her as a bride to seal a peace. And Eirik, wanting peace more than he wanted to keep her close, had let her go. The neighbouring Alpha had not wanted a bride. He had wanted a hostage and an insult, a way to humble the young king. He had sent her back a season later in a cart, the way they sent me. She had not survived what was done to her in that season. Eirik had burned the pack that did it to the ground. That was the war that had made his name, the one mothers frightened children with. And he had kept her ashes in a jar in a cold room, and her child's practice sword on the mantel. And he had sworn, Osric told me, that he would never again let a woman cross his threshold as a thing to be used and do nothing. You understand now, Osric said quietly, what he saw when they walked you up the hall in ropes. He did not see you. He saw her. The ash you went and watched go south. That was not a love letter, girl. That was a vow 11 years old, finally getting its second half. I stood in that cold room with the jar of his sister's ash, and I felt the flattering story I had told myself burn down to nothing, and something harder and colder rise up in its place. And I have not been the soft thing I was that morning since. I was not his mate. I was his penance. The war was not about me. It had never been about me. I was the shape an old grief had finally found to pour itself into. And the king had taken one look at a woman in ropes and seen, not a woman, but a debt he had been waiting 11 years to pay. Wrath had sent me to be used up and forgotten, and Eirik, who hated wrath, who would burn wrath to ash, was doing the exact same thing in the opposite direction, using me, the symbol, the spark, to settle an account that had nothing to do with who I actually was. I went to find him. I found him in the war room with his captains and a map of the southern border. And I did not wait to be acknowledged, because I was finished waiting to be acknowledged by anyone. "Send me back," I said. The room went silent. Eirik came around the table. "No."
You do not even know what I am asking. My voice had gone very quiet and very flat, the register I keep for the things that matter most. You think I am asking you to surrender me. I am not. I am asking you to look at me. Actually at me. Not at the cart they sent me in, not at the sister you could not save, and tell me whether you have once, in 4 days, wanted Sable, the woman, or whether you have only wanted the chance to be the man who did not let it happen twice. I watched that land like a blade going in. You burned my whole history to settle yours. You never asked me what I wanted done with mine. You are kinder than Roth, and you are doing the same thing he did. You decided what I was for, and you never once asked. For a long moment, the most feared wolf in the north could not look at me, which told me I was right. Her name was Ingrid, he said finally, to the map, not to me. I have not said it out loud in 11 years. And you are correct, and it is the worst thing anyone has ever said to me, and I do not know how to stop. His hand had closed on the edge of the table. The wood complained under it. My wolf chose you in the hall before I had a thought in my head, and I was so grateful, God help me, I was so grateful to finally have a reason to do the thing I had been waiting 11 years to do, that I let myself believe the reason was you. You are not my penance, Sable. You are the only thing in 11 years that has made me want to put the jar in the ground. He looked up. I do not know how to want a person without turning them into a cause. No one ever taught me. I had a sister and I traded her for peace, and I have been at war ever since, with everyone, mostly myself. Teach me. I am asking. It was not a declaration. It was worse than a declaration. It was true. And I, who had been sent north to be nothing, stood in a war room and watched the king of the Iron Territories hand me the one thing Roth never could have. The truth, with nothing dressed over it. Then end your war, I said. Not because of me. Because it is the right war for the right reason. Fought clean. And let me end mine. Because I had not told them everything. I had a weapon of my own, and it was time to use it. Roth did not wait for the parley to make his first move against me. He never could resist a quiet knife before a loud one. He sent it dressed as a peace gift, a cask of southern wine, carried north by a trembling envoy under a truce flag, a gesture of goodwill from the wolf and thorn to the king who burned its banner. The court wanted to pour it at the high table that very night, to show they did not fear him. I was the one who stopped it, because I had spent 9 years pouring Roth's wine, and I knew the smell of his goodwill. Do not open it in the hall, I said to Eirik, low, while the envoy bowed and scraped. Open it in the yard, with me there, and do not let that man leave until it is done. We broached it in the cold of the yard, with the envoy white as tallow, and the smell came off it before the bung was fully out. The faint, bruised almond sweetness of the thing I had ground 100 times in Roth's own stores. Monkshood, steeped deep, enough in a single cup to put down the king and his second, and whoever else drank to the South's false peace. The envoy bolted. Osric caught him at the gate. He meant it for your table, I told Eirik,
and my hands were steady though the rest of me was not. And he meant me to be the one who poured it, because a rankless woman pours and is not watched. He has not understood yet that no one here makes me pour anything. I looked at the ruined cask. That is his message. Now let me answer it with mine. It had very nearly worked.
If the court had had its way and broached the cask at the high table, half the king's household would have been dead before the candles guttered, and the wolf and thorn would have flown over an empty throne by spring. Eric understood, standing in that cold yard, exactly how close it had come, and exactly who had stood between him and it. And the look he gave me then was not a king looking at a cause. It was a man looking at a person he had almost lost. Roth's final move came at the parley, as I had known it would, because Roth never simply did a thing when he could do it as a message. He came to the border under a flag of truce, with 100 warriors at his back, and he offered Eirik peace on one condition: the return of his property, me. He stood on the cold ground between two armies and called me a runaway and a thief, and a thing that belonged to the wolf and thorn. And he watched the king's face for the humiliation he had been trying to provoke since the day he put me in the cart. I stepped out from behind the line before Eirik could answer. That was my doing, not his. We had agreed on it, and it had cost him everything he had to let me. I am not your property, Roth, I said, and my voice carried across the cold ground to two armies. And we both know I am not why you came. You came because a king burned your banner, and you cannot afford to look weak in front of your own pack. And you thought trading on a rankless woman would buy back your dignity for nothing. But I kept the rolls of our pack for 9 years, my lord, before you ever thought me worth throwing away. I poured the wine at every council. A rankless woman is invisible. Do you know what an invisible woman hears? I saw it reach him. I saw the frost in his face crack. She hears how the old alpha really died, I said. Not the fever you announced. I was pouring the wine. I saw the cup. I have spent 9 years being the nothing in your hall, and I know exactly what you put in it, and exactly who held it, and I have written it all down in a hand that 3 border alphas will recognize as mine. Because I kept their rolls too, in the years you loaned me out like a tool. I let the silence stretch. You did not send an insult north, Roth. You sent the one witness you should have killed. Withdraw, and the account stays sealed. Cross this line, and every alpha between here and the sea learns by winter how the wolf and thorn really changed hands. What happened next happened fast. Roth was not a man who could survive being seen, and a man who cannot survive being seen will always reach for the blade. And the blade he reached for came at me, the witness, the loose end, exactly as I had known it might. But I had not stepped out from that line to be saved. I had a knife of my own now. The eastern road and a hard winter teach a woman things. I did not kill him. I was not there to give them a martyr. I turned his own blade past me, and I put mine where it would end the fight and not the man, through the meat of his sword arm, so that the alpha of the wolf and thorn dropped his weapon in front of 2 armies, and his own warriors saw him disarmed by the rankless woman he had thrown away. The cost of it landed on me a heartbeat later, his blade having opened my side as it went past, and I felt the cold of the wound drive in deep and the ground tilt. But I stayed on my feet, because there are moments a woman does not get to fall down in, and I bled into the frost in front of 2 armies, and did not let one of them see me waver. Eirik reached me as I swayed. He did not pick me up. He put his shoulder under mine so that I could keep standing, which is the difference between being rescued and being seen.
And he understood that difference now, and I loved him for understanding it. "Stand her down," he said to Roth's white-faced warriors, and they did, because their alpha was bleeding and disarmed, and the witness was still on her feet. There was no war that day. There was no war any day. Roth's own pack took him home in irons before the season turned. Once the rolls in my hand made their quiet way to the border alphas, and the wolf and thorn that had flown for 200 years came down for good. Not burned to ash by a king in the end, but laid down by the rankless woman they had thrown away. Which is a better ending, and I am not too proud to say I prefer it.
They stitched my side in the same tower room with the fire and the open door. Eric sat with me through it, which kings do not do, and when it was done and the healer gone, he did not thank me, which I have loved him for ever since, because gratitude would have made it a debt, and I had had enough of being owed. "I put the jar in the ground this morning," he said, "while you were sleeping, Ingrid. I should have done it 11 years ago. I think I kept it so long because the war was easier than the grief, and you—" He stopped. His hand had found the edge of the bed. "You made the war stop being easier. You made me want to be a man with something to lose again, instead of a man with something to avenge. I do not have a pretty word for what that is." "You do not need a pretty word," I said. "You need to ask me the question you climbed a tower to ask on the second night and ran away from." The corner of his hard mouth moved, the way it had the first day in the hall. "Stay," he said, plainly, costing him everything. Not as a gift, not as a penance, not as the woman who ended a war. Stay as Sable. I will spend the rest of it learning who that is. I am told I am bad at this. I am willing to be bad at it in front of you for a very long time. I made him wait until I had stopped pretending the wound was why my eyes were wet. Then I said yes. The kiss that came after I will not give you in detail, except that it tasted of ash and wood smoke, and something underneath it that was clean, the way a field smells the spring after it has burned, and that it was the moment I stopped being the thing people sent away and became at last a thing that someone wanted to keep. A year on, there is grass growing where his sister's jar went into the ground, and Eric walks there now, instead of sitting in a cold room. And some mornings, I find him telling Ingrid things, which I leave him to, because a man should be allowed to introduce his sister to the woman who taught him how to bury her. "I am no one's gift and no one's penance. I am the Luna of the Iron Territories, which still makes the court swallow strangely. And I keep the rolls myself, because I have learned what an unkept record can be made to do. And I do not intend to be invisible in anyone's hall, ever again. And every so often, when the council grows proud, Eric will take one look across the hall at the rankless woman they sent him as an insult, and his wolf will come up gold into his eyes, helpless with it, in front of his entire court, and he will lose, openly, without shame, an argument with the best part of himself. He has stopped minding that they see it. I have stopped pretending I do not love it. So tell me, before you go, because Eric and I have never quite agreed, that first day in the hall, when he took one look and sent a war back, was that his wolf already seeing me, the real me, before either of us knew my name? Or was it only the old grief, reaching for the nearest woman in a cart, and the seeing came later, the hard way? I have my answer. He has his, and he is usually wrong about himself in the most honest way a man can be. Tell me yours below. And if you want to follow what comes next, the first border council where I take Roth's old seat, and what Eric's wolf does the day the Southern Alphas have to bow to the gift they swore was nothing, comment the ash, and stay close to the fire. Where are you listening from tonight? There is a chair at our table now, in a hall that smells of wood smoke, and the door is open. Come and sit. That is the whole of it, her side of the story.